So thank you very much again for inviting me to speak at the final e-conference of this important project. I was asked to speak about an online resource I was involved in developing a few years ago for use by members of the judiciary and court staff concerning defendants with mental health conditions, autism, intellectual disabilities in the criminal courts. I'm also going to touch very briefly on prevalence and challenges faced by individuals with disabilities. I'm briefly going to describe a service in England that seeks to identify and assess when a person's needs when they first encounter the criminal justice system. And I will also say a few words about the role of intermediaries in ensuring a person's fair access to justice in the criminal courts. So I'm just going to put the website that I referred to just now up on the screen so that you can see that, and I'll say a few words about it. So on screen now, you should be seeing the website that I was involved in developing. There's no shortage of information about mental health conditions, autism, or intellectual disabilities. What this resource sought to achieve was to include enough information without being overwhelming and to make it context specific, meaning what was it that was most relevant for members of the judiciary and court staff to better understand the person stood before them? What additional information should they request? Where appropriate, what the sentencing options were for people with psychosocial disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and autism. So to develop this resource, we worked in partnership with representatives from the judiciary, the Justices Clerks College, and the Judicial College. And we did this to ensure their buy-in. Our reasoning was that if they were involved, then the resource was more likely to be relevant to them, and they were more likely to help us to disseminate the resource and to give it their support. We also included people with intellectual disabilities and people with psychosocial disabilities to hear directly from them what they thought it was important that members of the judiciary understood about their experiences. And we did some film clips, and I'll come on to that in a moment. The resource is freely available and the text can be downloaded. So if I just click on contents, you can see here, there is a print-friendly PDF that you can download to get all the text. And then this is a list of the various things that the resource covers. So as a result of our working together with the magistracy, the role of a mental health and intellectual disability champion was established to encourage and support awareness raising and training in local branches of the Magistrates Association. And I've already heard from this morning's session how training and awareness raising is considered to be really important amongst criminal justice personnel. The website has got pretty good usage, mostly from the UK, but also from around the globe. And I'll be showing one of the film clips from this resource later on in my presentation. It probably is in need of a bit of an update. So while some of the content remains good, there have been some changes in sentencing here in England and Wales that we need to go back and update. So I'm going to go back into my PowerPoint presentation. And say a few words about prevalence. And the reason I wanted to say a few words about prevalence is because I don't think it's just about when people have a diagnosis. So international literature, we all know, points to a disproportionate number of people with psychosocial disabilities caught up in the criminal justice system around the globe. And this is due to many and often complex reasons, of which poverty and limited access to community, medical care and social support are especially significant. This in turn can leave individuals vulnerable to exploitation. Behaviour associated with disability and so-called crisis can precipitate contact with the police when no offending behaviour has actually taken place. And people with psychosocial disabilities, intellectual disabilities, or autism will also encounter the criminal justice system for alleged offending, just like you and I. Less is known about people with intellectual disabilities, and probably even less about people with autism. In England and Wales, estimates vary, but it's generally acknowledged that around 7% of the prison population has an intellectual disability. But the group that also interests me deeply is the further 25% who have needs associated with low levels of literacy and communication skills. So when we're considering equal treatment within the criminal justice system and fair access to justice, it seems to me that it's very important to look further than a diagnosis and to consider the needs of the individual in front of us. My main point here as well is that we aren't talking about a few individuals in need of support. We're talking about many, or even most of those who pass through the criminal courts. The criminal courts, it has to be said, are challenging for most people, but especially so for people who find it hard to read and write, who find it hard to express themselves, to understand what others are saying, and to concentrate. Fast is the word that came up so often when I spoke to people about their experiences of being in court. A few years ago, I did a series of interviews with men and women in prison who had been sentenced, who either had an intellectual disability or were suspected of having an intellectual disability. And the quotes on this slide are a snapshot of how they describe their experiences in court. I'm just going to read them out. I couldn't really hear, I couldn't understand. Sometimes they tell you two things at once. They talk so fast, they were jumping up and down and saying things. I gave up listening. The judge asked me if I understood, and I said yes, even though I didn't. My legs turned to jelly and my mum collapsed. Everyone was talking, but I didn't know what was going on. The solicitor tried to talk to me, but used big words. When she left, I thought, what was that all about? And finally, and one of the most worrying quotes, and it wasn't an isolated quote, I understand I've done something wrong, but I'm still not quite sure as to what that is. So it's pretty clear from these quotes that we've got a problem. Fair justice will never be achieved unless and until things change. Personally, I would go for a root and branch reform of the whole criminal justice system. But in 20 minutes, I'm going to stick to rehearsing the challenges faced by people with disabilities, and also just to tell you a little bit about two ways in which their experiences can be improved. And these are Liaison and Diversion Service and Intermediaries, which I will come on to in a moment. But first, and this is where the technology, where I need help with the technology, I'm going to stop sharing because I want to show you a short film clip. COVID makes it much harder to include people with intellectual disabilities in a joint presentation. And the film clip that I'm going to show you in a moment is of three men with intellectual disabilities, Darren, Graham and Anthony, who will tell us something about how disability affects their daily lives, how they came to offend, and their experiences of the criminal justice system and the criminal courts in particular. So Maria, please, would you play my film clip? I don't hear any sound.
Question to kick in because I can't chat online as normal people would, and I struggle to get my words out. And when people text me, it's sometimes frustrating because I can't always text back, and I struggle with texting. sometimes I struggle to read my household bills or letters, and I get a lot of support from caring and from my family.
Didn't realise I had learning difficulty, and I got like into quite a bit of trouble because I didn't realise that my learning disability wasn't like normal. Like I got involved in the wrong crowd, so I wasn't using my brain basically. So sometimes I get bad influence quickly.
Asperger's is a very social interaction illness, and people with Asperger's do suffer on that side particularly bad. Actually, seem to have fewer friends than the normal-ish people. I don't like using the word normal actually, but and also they don't seem to do very well that way. And few relationships don't seem to do very well in employment, as you've just said, again because of that. And it's a frustration. That's the only way I can describe it. It's the frustration of other people and other people's attitudes that then gets, well, it used to get me mad, upset, angry. And of course, that used to get me in trouble. So that, and trying to work all that out in the early days was difficult.
I'm one of these people who I used to go looking for friends or go and find my friends and what have you. One time I just mixed with the wrong crowd, and last is the wait by the roadside where they go and see a friend. So I was standing by the roadside, waiting for them, coming back, and the next thing I knew is I had a tap on my shoulder, and it was a policeman asking what I was doing. Told him I was waiting some friends and then went in that house, and I got arrested because it belonged to me that my so-called friend have just burgled that house I pointed to. So I got arrested for aiding and abetting, which at the time I didn't know what that was.
Well, the reason why I had to go to court is because like, I was outside and I dropped some kind of floor, and then like the policeman saw me drop it on the floor and he just arrested me. And like then I went to the police station, and then what happened then is like a couple of days later I had a letter saying that I had to pay this £100 fine, which I didn't understand it, so I just like looked at it and just threw it in the bin. And then like about a week later, I'd say I had a letter saying I had to go to court.
Yes, my experience of the criminal justice system started when I was quite young, 18, 19. The trouble was mainly due to alcohol related stuff. But now in hindsight, it could be something else. It could be on the hindsight, it could be due to the Asperger's syndrome and not fitting in and using the alcohol to cover up. That eventually, of course, basically I used to get drunk and then kick off at police when I got arrested, not fully understanding why I'm arrested.
I remember one of the questions is a dwelling, what it was like when you were at the for instance, it was like number 15 dwelling estate. I didn't know what that jargon meant when you said dwelling, and I've forgotten what it is now. But it was sort of jargon like that I couldn't understand.
I didn't know I could ask for help, so I wasn't, I wanted to ask for help, but I didn't want to ask for help because I thought if I ask for help, I'm going to look stupid, and they're going to say, "Oh, thicko," and that I didn't really want people to know. So I wasn't I didn't want to ask for help. So about that, if I did ask for help, that it'd make it look worse, that I'm thick and stupid, and I didn't, you know.
Thank you very much indeed for showing that clip. So I've just got a few minutes left and I'm going to focus on my two examples. So Liaison and Diversion is a service in England that, amongst other things, helps to identify and assess when a person first encounters the criminal justice system. In 2009, a review of people with mental health problems or intellectual disabilities recommended a service to help identify people with psychosocial disabilities, intellectual disabilities, autism, substance misuse problems, and other vulnerabilities when they first came into contact with the police. And that service is called Liaison and Diversion. Excuse me. The thinking behind Liaison and Diversion is based on the recognition that many offenders have unmet health and social care needs that can contribute towards their offending behaviour, and that in meeting a person's health and social care needs, we can start to reduce reoffending. The services are located at police stations and in the criminal courts, and are staffed by qualified health and social care workers funded by our National Health Service. So they're not a justice service, it's a health service. Staff meet all children and women who are brought into police custody and men who the police think might be vulnerable. So all they have to do is think that they might be vulnerable. In collaboration with the person concerned, Liaison and Diversion staff undertake assessments and have access to healthcare records. They prepare reports that help to inform criminal justice decision-making, identify when reasonable accommodations are necessary, and make referrals into local services. Now, importantly, all of that is done with the consultation with the person concerned. So the person has to agree to participate. This is something that is done with them and not to them. Over the last 10 years, Liaison and Diversion services have developed, and we now have 100% population coverage across England. The two main aims are to improve health and social care outcomes and to reduce reoffending. Currently, we lack evidence to demonstrate how well these aims are being met, but the evidence that does exist is promising. So, for example, one study involving around 4,500 people found a statistically significant reduction in the amount of offending following contact with Liaison and Diversion services, and a statistically significant reduction in the use of hospital detention. Now, I could say more, but time is limited. So I'm going to move on 2 more slides just to say a few words about intermediaries and the importance of the role of intermediary in the criminal courts. So evidence from England and Wales demonstrates that around 60% of young offenders have communication needs, sometimes referred to as communication difficulties or speech and language needs or difficulties. Adults with intellectual disability or autism frequently have communication needs, and many people with psychosocial disabilities may require support with communication. This quote is taken from the report of the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which sets out international principles and guidelines on access to justice for persons with disabilities, which I think you touched on this morning. So I want to read it out because I think it's really quite important. So intermediaries are persons who work as required with justice system personnel and persons with disabilities or effective communication during legal proceedings. They support persons with disabilities to understand and to make informed choices. making sure that things are explained and are talked about in ways that they can understand, and that appropriate accommodations and support are provided. Intermediaries are neutral, really important. Intermediaries are neutral, and they do not speak for persons with disabilities or for the justice system, nor do they lead or influence decisions or outcomes. Now, if we reflect on the quotes from people with intellectual disabilities I read out earlier, and on what Darren, Graham and Anthony said in the film clip, I think it makes it really clear why the role of intermediary is so important in enabling access to justice and equal treatment. Being able to understand the charge against us and to participate effectively in our own defence is fundamental to a fair trial. In England and Wales, the use of intermediaries was introduced in the Youth Justice and Criminal Evidence Act as a reasonable accommodation for witnesses. In law, only children and adult witnesses have an entitlement to an intermediary, not defendants. And this is increasingly seen as unfair and even discriminatory. And several organisations are demanding that other adult defendants are given the same entitlement in law to assistance from an intermediary as are witnesses. Intermediary schemes exist around the globe, including in the countries listed on this slide. Part of my work involves coordinating a small global network of disability rights advocates and others who are concerned about access to justice and equal treatment for persons with disabilities. One of our members has produced a report on intermediary services around the globe, which is available now and I'm happy to share. And another member has developed a starter kit for jurisdictions interested in establishing their own intermediary services, and that will be available later this year. So it's been a bit of a rapid run through. Thank you very much indeed. I will end by saying there remains much work to be done to enable access to justice for persons with disabilities. And I really appreciate the invitation to share some of my thoughts at this important event. Thank you.